things are working. Okay, recording should start now. Good. So we just started the recording. This is the Dutch Clojure Meetup. Thanks to everyone for coming tonight to spend some time with us. This is Meetup number. I keep forgetting a number. I think it's like 126, but I'm not really sure. But if you are new to the Meetup, just it's good to know this is consecutive months, the number of consecutive months with Clojure Meetups in the Netherlands. So it's a lot of time. I'm getting older during hosting the Meetup. I lost all of my hair. I had lots of hair when I started, and now it is what it is. So it's an informal group of people that are interested into Clojure, and we try to do something together, which can be fun for Clojure-minded people during the evening. Today, as it often happens in this Meetup, we do not have an agenda, so we will have to figure something out. What can we do of interest? First of all, I do have a backup plan. So I did prepare something for tonight in case we cannot figure out something interesting. But I'm gonna do first a round table. If anybody has something interesting that would like to share or talk about, just come forward.
Maybe me. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll hear.
My name is Oscar van Dijk. I'm the founder of Medicine Man. We're based in Utrecht, and maybe later on, me or one of our guys, Jasper, can tell a little bit about what we do with Clojure. I didn't realize that this group has had so many meetings already. It's quite amazing. And for me, it's really bad that this is my first meeting. But I just wanted to introduce myself. So hello.
Hi. Yeah, well, the idea behind the Meetup, the idea that I have about this Meetup is that Clojure is a niche technology, and the community, especially in this small country, it's even smaller. So my idea is to have a solid platform of people, not a technological platform, but a social platform, so that if you have some interest into Clojure, you can find like-minded people to cultivate your interest and maybe find ways to use it professionally. Along the past 10 years, many faces have come and gone. Many companies were created and closed down during the tenure of my tenure as the Meetup organizer, but I can see Clojure growing as technology of choice for companies in the country. So I tend to believe that we are doing something good by keeping the Meetups happening, regardless of global pandemics or me going on holidays. I went on holidays, even if a Meetup was organized for the past 126 months. So yeah, it's all good. Yeah. It looks like Manuel is trying to speak, but it's muted. Yeah.
Yes, sorry, I forgot I was muted. Yeah, I also want to introduce myself. First, my name is Manuel. I'm originally from Colombia, and I live in Amsterdam. I'm probably the newbie of the group. So I'm just almost started learning Clojure a few months ago, and I was looking for meetups and community in the Netherlands, and I found this group. I wanted to go to some of the meetings, but then the pandemic happened, and I just realized today that you were having this meeting online. Because I saw a tweet on Twitter and decided to join, and yeah, see what was going about, what was about. Yeah, as I said before, I just started learning Clojure a few months ago. I've been a programmer for a long time, and yeah, I've just been amazed by this language and the community. I've been lurking around on Clojurian Slack and Clojureverse and other communities. and I'm still learning, but enjoying it a lot. Loving the simplicity and functional programming. So yeah, that's me.
Okay. And what's your poison usually? So if it's not Clojure, what do you use for coding?
Well, at work, I mostly use Java. But before that, I've used like a ton of different languages. I've used Python, Perl. I used Dart, C#, C++ for a while. And yeah, but Clojure is actually my first kind of like functional experience. And it's been really nice. I especially like nowadays that I work a lot of with Java, like I can. It's amazing how simple some things are in Clojure, and how messy things get when you start using classes and object orientation. So for me, it's been like a huge discovery of wow, this is a new world. Things can be simpler. Yeah.
Good. Yeah. I had a similar history, probably lots of Java, some C++. So I feel for you. And also coming into Clojure from that angle, it can be harsh on your brain trying to grok what the hell all those parentheses mean. So let's see if we can help out with your path into enlightenment, I guess.
Thank you.
Before we continue, we have one new person that joined. As I mentioned, we are recording this event. I'm not sure we are going to publish it on YouTube for real if the content is not worthwhile. But just so you know, you are being recorded. We might publish this event on YouTube. So you sticking around is your silent consent that you're fine with it. And Tom, yeah, to you.
Yeah, great. So my name is Tom. I'm originally from California. I am currently in the south of Chile. I did live and work in the Netherlands for about 2 years. I lived and worked in Amsterdam. About a year ago, I returned to California and then later Chile because of some health issues due to with my father. So unfortunately, I did leave the Netherlands, but I really enjoyed my time there and hope to be back sometime. And I did attend Dutch Clojure days while I was there. I never did attend any one of these particular meetups, unfortunately. But you know, I was always, you know, very impressed with well, just the software developers in general that I met there, and then especially the Clojure developers at Dutch Clojure days. And so, you know, I really want to stay in touch with everyone, and then of course, you know, improve my Clojure skills. And so, you know, attending this meetup and hanging out on Slack is one way for me to do that. Yeah, I first found out about and taught myself Clojure in 2012. Since then, I've had three different jobs where I worked on Clojure. So I worked for a company through a series of acquisitions, wound up writing a streaming music service for electronic dance music. And so I built an early version of a REST API for that in Clojure, and then later a search service, but that was in Python. Then later a document management system in Clojure. This was mostly for companies like hospitals and banks that had to prove that their computer information systems were in compliance with various rules and regulations. And so it was a system to help them prove that they were compliant. Right now, I am working remotely for a company in the States, building something completely in Clojure using Datomic as well. It's an online tool for collaborating on CAD drawings and for soliciting bids for building the things that people might produce in CAD in the system. We're still very early days, and I'm currently the only developer, and hopefully that changes soon. Hopefully I'm not the only one working on this, but yeah, another reason to do this, to network, and at some point I'll be responsible for growing the team. So,
all right.
Yeah, so that's me in a nutshell.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. So I think what I would like to do to get started with some dirty Clojure talks. So Jasper, as I understand that you might have something you want to show us, right? Do you have anything prepared?
No, I don't have anything to show, but I would like to introduce myself. I am Jasper. I'm a Clojure developer. I work for Medicine Man, like Oscar, who said that before. I started working on Clojure about 2 or 3 years ago, and I've been using it at my job. I was at another meetup from the Dutch Clojure meetup last year. Haven't been to any other, unfortunately. But I liked it, and it made me go to Heart of Clojure last year, which was really nice. And yeah, I really like the Clojure community. There's a lot of interesting people. So
that's a way of putting it, yeah.
Yeah, that's me.
All right. Okay, so if you do not have anything prepared to show, then I do have my backup plan prepared. So what I would like to show you guys, if you're fine with it, is a library that I got to use in a recent project I had for a client. Let me just introduce the concept. And this is actually not something that happens often. I usually try not to present anything because I'm the host already. So why should I hog the internet space with my blabbering? But so let's see if that's useful for anyone. This is the library I would like to talk about. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's a small library, I'd say. It's a one-man show. There's only one person doing it, and it's about property-based testing. Make a very weird face if you are not familiar with the concept of property-based testing. Okay, everybody. Okay, good. So then it makes my life easier. Just in case we are gonna put this on YouTube, property-based testing is a way of pretty much doing generational testing. So generate tests that ensure some invariants that you define are always respected throughout the tests. And specifically, this library is aiming at testing stateful services. In Clojure land, we like pure functions. We like things that do not hold state, so that you can test them in an easy way. But life is not always like that. You do have stateful systems, and you would still like to test them. This library helps you out with that, trying to have a way of doing property-based testing, keeping track of state that's captured by the application under test. So specifically, this library is leveraging Clojure test check for the generators, for generating tests. And it's what it does, in essence, is giving you a way of mimicking, so keeping an in-memory representation of what you think the state of your application should be throughout the execution of the tests, so that you can compare, when you poke the system, you can compare the results with what you expect the state to be. That's in essence what it does. And again, uses Clojure test check for the generation of the tests, giving some rules that you specify. So here's the documentation is okay, I guess. Let's say more than average for the random library that you can find online. And it tells you how things are done. So before, instead of looking at the documentation, what I did was to prepare a simple test application to explain the concept a little bit more into the details. This is my Emacs, which is fairly loaded with custom stuff. So I hope my text transformations don't hurt your eye too much. But let's try to see how the application looks like. So the library looks like. So it all starts with defining your test specifications with pure data. So this is part of the library. It expects you to specify your test case in this way. There are many more optional keywords in the setup map that you can provide. What I provided is what commands are going to be executed, generated by the test, a way of generating an initial state of the application under test, to refresh the initial state of the application under test, and a way of setting the initial in-memory representation of the application state. So as I said, you have the library itself allows you to keep your representation of the state, which is like this at the beginning, and then allows you to set up the application under test, and then generates commands by means of some description that you give of the commands that you know how to that you can use to poke the system under test. So I was trying to figure out what can be an easy thing that is stateful that we can use to demonstrate this library. So what I did was to just look into core cache, Clojure core cache, which is by definition a stateful thingy. It's something that keeps some cache, and I didn't find any bug, so it works. Yay! Not much in terms of showing how it recognizes failures, but at least it's something you can understand how it works. So the system under test is least recently used cache, which means something that will only keep in memory as many elements as the threshold. Let's put 1 to begin with. So yeah, this is my setup function, which generates a new cache having only one element, with the keyword 1 mapped to the value 42. And then let's look at the commands. I have 2 commands. One cache hit command, and one cache through, which is they are slightly different. I was just playing with how can you generate different commands. The idea being that this command is a guaranteed cache hit, and the through command is not necessarily a cache hit, it can be a cache miss. And I just wanted to poke the system in this way. Let's look at how you can define a command. So maybe this can even be better. So this is how you specify a command. It's a series of keywords, and some other keywords can be provided. They are documented in the official documentation, and everything is mapped to a function. So you have a function that generates arguments to be given to your command, the command function itself, a function that generates the new in-memory representation of your state after the command has been executed, and a function that performs the assertion. So the post condition is pretty much your test assertion. For a cache hit, what I say is that so that the arguments generation function is somebody's coming to the meetup, and yeah, hi Jay, welcome. Before I continue, a couple of notices. You are being recorded as we speak. We might publish this video online, so if you're not fine with that, it's a good time to leave. Otherwise, you're welcome to stick around with the crew. We are talking about the generational testing for stateful systems. So anyway, awesome. The arguments generation function is responsible to, well, generate the input arguments to your command. The way it works is it receives in input the current in-memory representation of your application state and generates whatever arguments you want to produce. In my case, I'm testing a cache, and I'm defining a cache hit command. And if you look at my in-memory representation of the state, of the application state, it keeps track of what was the last hit and how many cache misses I have. So in order for the cache hit command to work, what I need to do is to make sure that I'm invoking, I'm getting the last hit element from the cache. And the reason for the last hit is that if you look at how I'm constructing the cache right now, I'm enforcing the cache to only hold one element. So cache hit right now can only work if I ask out of the cache the same thing that was last hit. And the last hit is initialized with the only element currently in the cache. So the way it works is returning a vector of arguments to a function. And I'm using a generator that always returns the same value. So it's not really generating anything. The command function is over here. It's responsible for actually poking the system somehow. And the arguments received are the ones returned by the argument generation function. And whatever it is doing right now, it's saying, so I'm doing something a bit horrible over here. I didn't find a better way of doing this, but it kind of works. So Clojure core cache it works this way. So the way it works is it works on immutable cache objects. So whenever I am creating a cache, I'm doing it like this. I'm generating a cache and assigning it to an atom. And that's because every time you operate on the cache, the cache itself is immutable. So every function that operates on caches return the new cache object. So that's why I have to hold everything in an atom, and I need to swap the cache atom using the through cache. This is the key I'm searching into the cache, and this is the function that is invoked if I have a cache miss, which is used to actually retrieve the value which was not found in the cache. So what I'm doing here is to keep track whether or not I had a cache miss. I'm creating a local atom, and this function is only invoked in a case of cache miss, so that I'm just marking the execution as a cache miss, and the result of the command function is whatever was inside the miss atom over here. The next state is used after the execution of a command to produce the next in-memory representation of your application state. It receives the previous state, the arguments of the command function, and the result of the command function. And yeah, so what I'm doing is I'm updating the previous state, associating the last hit to the argument to the cache hit function, and updating the misses, summing one up in case it was a cache miss. Last thing on a command, at least the way I designed it, is the post condition. As I mentioned, this is actually your test assertion. So you're using the post condition to make sure that the system is actually properly behaving or behaving properly. And the arguments to this function are the previous state, so that the state before the command, the state after the command, and then the arguments to the command function and the result of the command function. I'm not using them, those arguments. So one thing in Clojure land, just for people new to the language, usually you use underscore to denote an argument you don't use. One thing that I just started doing as of CLJ condo started to actually lint my code is to still provide a descripting input argument name so that you know what this is all about, and the underscore is to avoid CLJ condo my linter to mark it as an unused argument. If you do like this, it's marked as ignored. Anyways, so the post condition is the assertion, and what I'm just checking is this is a cache hit command. So the invariant for this command is that previous misses is equal to next misses, meaning I had a cache hit. I did specify another command, which is the through cache. This is not making any assumption whether we are going to have a cache hit or not. So let's see how it works. So we have the argument generation function. This is actually generating values. So I specified just a vector of possible keys that I'm gonna extract out of the cache, query the cache with. And these gen elements is generating random elements out of these. The command function receives one auto-generated key and has pretty much the same exact logic as the cache hit. So I could actually encapsulate this in the same function and reuse it all over the place. The next state is also identical to the other one, so probably I'm going to refactor this code to actually use the same function. The post condition is different though, because in the through command, I make no assumption whether this is, I don't try to always have a cache hit. So I need to check if the invariant is, if I had a cache miss, then it should be the case that the amount of misses after the command is equals to the previous misses plus one. And it also should be the case that the key that I passed on to the command function is not the same key as the previously last hit. Otherwise, it should have been a cache hit. And otherwise, if it was a cache hit, then it's pretty much the same assertion as the cache hit one. Clear so far? Makes sense? Okay. So now the way it works, I can do this. Oh, maybe not here, but in the correct namespace. So here you see what the system is doing is actually trying to break the system. It's generating many sequences of commands, and the scope of this library is to find the minimum amount, the minimum sequence of commands that will break your system. And it is not able to break the system every time, every command it tries to do, it's actually succeeding. And I have some logging as part of my command function to make sure that I can trace back what's happening, and eventually it returns true saying the specification is correct. This is also integrating with Clojure test, so I can actually run the test. And so this actually is the result of Clojure test within my CIDR IDE. And let's try to break it. So I think I actually found an easy way to break it. I'm just not sure I know how to explain why this breaks. So the only thing I did was to increase the threshold of the cache from 1 to 2. So ideally, this thing should now be able to hold 2 things instead of 1. And I don't know why this is breaking. I would expect this to work, but at least it allows me to show you what happens if this library finds out something is not working. So what this is telling you is that, hey, I tried a sequence of 2 commands, this and that, and eventually some post condition broke. So this is the minimum reproduction scenario. You try a through command passing first 2, and then a through command passing 1, and you would expect the post condition to be true, and instead it's false. So it means something went wrong. So this is bizarre, because ideally, I do believe that this minimum scenario should work in Clojure core cache. So I'm gonna try with you to reason why this is failing, but let's see how can we try to understand that. So let me just maybe here, yeah. No. So what does it mean that this fails? So let me just try to start afresh. So now cache is the same as the original value. So the first thing was to try, well, we can try to swap cache through cache. Well, actually, you can copy that thingy instead of reset miss true, because I don't have the atom over here. What I'm gonna do is something went wrong, and instead of key, so what the generational test says is that I need to execute the through with the keyword 2. You see? Okay, now cache is like this, so it seems like it works. So why is this working? Maybe it's my miss counter management. So seems to work to me. So let's see if then I try to do through and 1. What happens? I would expect, yeah. So actually, cache seems to behave fine with the 2 elements. So probably something is wrong with my counters. So let's see if I can. And guys, if you can see whatever stupid thing I'm doing over here, that would be appreciated as well. So let me check first here. Print line, prn, miss, and I'm usually prefixing all of my commands with the name of the command, miss, and the key. Okay, in here I'm already printing previous last hit, the key, and I'd say also previous misses and next misses. Alrighty, so still broken. I re-executed the test. Maybe just let me clear my thing over here on my REPL and G. And it broke. So yeah, let me see, what the hell, do I ever have a cache miss? Yes, here. Yeah, I really cannot see how this thing is actually breaking anything. Yeah, I'm not sure why this is breaking. I think it's something about my setup, either my management here of what I'm doing with the miss counter, or my setup is not really working fine for whatever reason, or maybe the relationship between the setup state and the in-memory state representation is maybe not, maybe should be changed. Or maybe that's the reason. If I run setup, I might have to do something with the state. I'm not entirely sure. So that's the bummer for this presentation. I tried to understand why this was not working. I could not find that reason. I will probably update you guys later as soon as I find why on earth this is going wrong. But at least it makes for it allows me to show you what kind of feedback you get. In my experience, the feedback from this library is the worst part of the library. The library itself is fairly simple for how much expressivity it allows you to have in your generational tests, but feedback is not so awesome. So in order to actually reproduce your error, it takes considerable effort in my experience. But just for context, in the project where I discovered this library, the way we were using it was to test an API, an HTTP API. So whatever we did in the project was, instead of using a stupid cache, the tiny cache object, what we had was an actually running system exposing an HTTP API with, well, that's irrelevant, but with pedestal. And what we were doing is our command implementation would actually create mock HTTP requests using ring mock and feeding those requests to the controller functions and just letting the application go. So what we could do was to create commands, one command at least per every endpoint, so that you could simulate a user. You could simulate a user poking your API and letting the system generate HTTP requests for you. We had everything under Clojure spec. So all of the input of every HTTP endpoint would be fully spec'd. That would allow this tool to actually generate inputs to your API endpoints. So you would just let it go, test all of the endpoints, and ensuring your invariants would be properly set up so that for a given API endpoint, you would expect, for instance, a new user to be created, or some user details to be changed, or some permissions to be updated, and so on and so forth. So that, in my opinion, was actually awesome. It was the best way I ever had to test, to do integration tests for an API product. The whole thing was an HTTP endpoint, an HTTP API on top of the Atomic. So we also were running the generational tests against our running the Atomic instance. The whole construction was actually fairly solid, and it did allow us to spot nasty bugs that depended on the order of execution of specific HTTP requests to trigger the issue, which is super hard to find with regular unit tests. This is not making up for the fact that I cannot explain why this test is failing, but at least it gives you a perspective on why I consider this library worthwhile of your time. Would you have any question for me?
Yeah, I have one. Have you run it for a long time? Because, you know, in some other languages, when they run these tests, they run it for like one night or something to have millions of tests and to try to see if how it breaks.
We didn't run it for a long time. I think we had, so you can specify, of course, how many things you want to test. And you have many knobs so you can use to do that. You can configure the amount of threads you want to use. You want to configure how many tries, how many cycles of the test it will do. You can configure what's the longest sequence of commands that you want to generate. So and also time-wise, you can specify a timeline. So what we did was the test would last on top 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, the test itself would consider itself as a successful test, so it would stop. But it was only 10 minutes, which is not admittedly too much, but for us, the system was not super complicated from a domain logic perspective. So it was enough, 10 minutes was enough to uncover the nastiest bugs. And most of the logic was really covered by that. And if you had something stupid in your code, it would pop up in those 10 minutes most of the times. Maybe we should have at least a try to let it go for longer. Oh, I did encounter once what I think it's a bug of the system, and the test itself didn't stop. So I had to manually kill it after, I think, 3 hours of execution. And I think that might be, so there was a bug in my production code. And I think the bug in this library was about the shrinking phase. So what it does is goes while the generating input for your system. As soon as something breaks, it will try to shrink the test case so that you have the minimal reproduction case. And I think that's where something must be wrong. Maybe it goes into an infinite loop trying to shrink the test case. That's what I think it was. It's a fairly small library, I have to say. It is one-man show, so it's not like giant communities behind it. The code itself, I would say tiny for the thing it does. So what, 60? Let's say just 300 for the sake of it, 460, 560, 560, and yeah, so about 600 lines of code, the whole library. So, and it's fairly readable code, apart from some gymnastic with generators and stuff like that. It's a tiny library, and I was actually thinking, as soon as I have time, which means never, I'm gonna try to see if I can spot the bug with the shrinking. But it's yeah, and documentation is actually as part of the Git repository itself. And yeah, so here you have all of the documentation of all the keywords that you can give to your configuration. One thing that I really like is the fact, indeed, that you can, everything is specified as data and function. So that's actually fairly nice, I think, in a Clojure library. And sorry, I went a bit AWire. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, all good, all good. I like the documentation as well. Yeah, there is some documentation, so it's already good.
Yeah, indeed. An interesting thing about the documentation is this part, the symbolic values. So there is something, let's say, weird in the way things are passed around. So as I mentioned, in your post-condition functions, you receive the result of the execution of your command, but it is not really. I think either that or the input arguments to your command, they are not necessarily a value. They are what's called a symbolic value. So it's a sort of a wrapper for a value that the tool itself uses in order to be able to, backtrack whatever was tried before, especially in the shrinking phase. The system needs to do not try always the same thing, right? So what happens is that your functions actually receive a wrapper around a value. That means a few things cannot be done. So you need to take care in a way you are actually looking into those values. So it's something to pay attention to, but it is not really getting into your way too much. So yeah, this is a mental juggling phase that you need to just accept out of the library. That's the only weird thing in a way, but it's not getting into your way too much. You are writing your functions as usual. The only thing you cannot do, I think, is to I think it's not the post condition, actually, it's in here, maybe. I don't remember, honestly, maybe in the next state. Some of the functions receive this wrapper, and you can actually see that if you do a print line, you see those symbolic values being passed around somewhere. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I think some other things, yeah, might be worthwhile mentioning. I'm not sure. Let me check. Oh yeah, so a few interesting things that I didn't use in my test case is things like this. So in some cases, commands do not make sense. So think of, again, my use case was testing an API. Let's say that you want to test that a user tries to do something with your system, tries to update his profile. That command makes no sense until you have a user in your system. So let's say that you have one command that creates a user, one command that updates the details of a user, the second command requires the first command to be executed first. So you can specify constraints so that you tell the system out of your in-memory representation of the state, you can only try out this command if the current state contains a specific condition. So that's also fairly nice. And you have a few of these things that you can specify as part of a command. So that's it feels good, let's say. It would feel better if I could explain to you why my test fails, but it still feels good. Any other question or comment?
I have a question.
Sure.
So regarding the reduction, so my familiarity with test check is using it to generate data for a function and ensuring that that function returns a certain value for whatever data test check happens to generate according to some specification.
Mm-hmm.
So you said that the output when the test failed was the reduction of this global state. So for this global state, this is the smallest state for which something failed.
It's not entirely, so if that's what I said that was wrong, what this is the minimum, what the system found to be the minimum sequence of commands that will trigger the test failure.
Okay, so this is a sequence of steps. Create this user with this username.
Yeah.
Click on the activate button, whatever. Follow those steps, and you'll hit the error. So where does it show what exactly is failing? The function, the verify user account function. Where does it show that after these steps, this particular function fails?
Yeah. So your test assertion is your your post condition function. So what this means is I executed the command named through, and you can see the commands in here with their labels. So I executed the command named through, passing as input the keyword to, and the post condition was true. Immediately after which I executed the through command passing the keyword one, which made the post condition return false. That's the only feedback that you get from this system. And so it is like, yeah, it's similarly to what you have in Clojure test. If you say is so it's a semantically equivalent to this, right? So it is saying your assertion was expected to be this, but was found to be more like this. which is always like not your assertion. And if you look at it from this perspective, it says this, oh, something else failed. Interesting. Now it says I'm as a third, I think, third elements of a sequence. I do a hit command with the keyword 3. Oh, I think this is actually that's bizarre because it says true. I never saw anything like this. Do I have an exception somewhere? Yeah, probably not. Test spec. No, it doesn't really tell much. You need to. Did I change anything here? Why is it? Why it used to? Oh, that's interesting. One second. Then I'm going to explain what I have in my. Okay, now it's consistent. It's failing in the usual way, so to say. It felt a bit weird that if I had the extra test over here, it will always fail like this. But I think, yeah, it's now failing in different ways. But anyway, so this should tell you that the post condition failed. That should be the only information that the system is giving you. I'm not entirely sure why we also have situations in which, yeah, this one I do not really understand much. What does this mean? It post. This much I do not understand, because in my case, in my experience, it was always telling false over here when it was, or something was failing. So I was interpreting it as your post condition failed, and this is the sequence of commands that you can use to reproduce the error. But this is very weird. So let's say, and I guess if I do this, yeah, it's always failing in the same way. So to answer your question, I think it should be about the post condition fails. That's the only thing you can derive out of the test fail execution, is that one of your post conditions didn't return true, ideally. Let me just check the documentation real quick to make sure that I'm not saying something stupid. Yeah, so it should be like this. So it should be a predicate over a few values. So previous state, next state, input parameters to your command, and the result of your command. And it being false should be the trigger for the test to actually fail. So I think here there's a different example. So the example given in the README is about testing tree map for concurrency. So as soon as you hit concurrency 2, the tree map breaks. And this is trying to do something a bit more sophisticated. I just wanted to see how to actually, if it actually tells anything about it. Okay. Oh, I see. So this is, it was my bad. So this, let me see. So this is actually what's after the equal over here is not the result of your post condition. It's the result of your command. So if I see through command here. I'm executing the through command with the keyword to, and I'm saying true, meaning it's a cache miss because the command returns this. And then I'm executing that thingy again, and it's a cache miss false. And after that, the system breaks. And this, I do not understand why this happens, but yeah. And let's see if I can rerun the test until I find the other test failure mode. Yeah, here. And this says I executed the hit command with the keyword to as input, and it returns true as a cache miss, which is bizarre. The way I specify the command should never result in a cache miss. Actually, in the project where I was using this library more extensively, instead of returning a Boolean, I was returning a complex object over here, describing the outcome of the command. So it was a bit more informative in a way. If you look into the documentation here, it is actually returning something not easily inspectable. If you would have, let's just break the system. So if I say something goes here. Yeah, so if you return a map out of your command, then the output is actually more inspectable. So it's a bit, you can make your life easier by putting more context over here, I guess. So maybe that's something I should do to make sure I can explain what the hell is going wrong over here. Maybe I can actually try to do that. So let's say instead of that, I return miss, cache is cache. Yeah. Before cache. Cache after. So if I do, no, this doesn't exist. It's just cache. And then next state should be keys. So this way I can actually put a bit more context in here. And let's do the same also for the through command. Let's see what happens now. Cache miss false, cache before one, cache after one. So that seems actually okay. Let me just do one extra thing here as well. I want to see, well, I cannot put the state over here, actually. That's unfortunate. Let me see. Oh, post condition. I need to also change this. Otherwise, because this is also the return of the, here I'm actually not doing anything with it, so it's fine. Now it's failing as before. So we say it's a cache miss. The cache before was 142. The cache after was 142, 242. This actually seems okay. And then this is a cache miss false. The cache before was 1 and 2. Cache after was 1 and 2. So it actually looks okay. I have no idea why the post condition fails in this case. Okay, if you guys are still interested into the thing, I'm actually gonna try and solve the mystery with you. Otherwise, we can switch topics as you prefer. This is just my itch to scratch if you want. So, so in the post conditions, let me see. Let me just do something. Let success this, and then if let success, then let's say it's success, so true. Otherwise, do print line prn. This is semi it, and then hit post condition, and I'm gonna say I want to inspect my state, so and then result. And well, actually, this returns nil, so it's okay. And I'm even gonna say I don't need this thing over here. And then I can do the same with the other post condition. I can say if this is my definition of success. If that's the case, it's true. Otherwise, PRN, yeah, I'm gonna do similar thing as before. This is the no true post condition, and then previous. And then result is okay. Here. So here we have a hit 3 that fails. It says it's a cache miss. Before it was 142, and cache after was 1 and 3. So this should never happen. So the way I thought I set up my system was that to generate the arguments for the hit command, I would only pick the last hit from the state. So why do I have a cache before 1 and I receive a 3 as a hit command? That should not happen. So this should only, or let me just remove some clutter from my logs, because otherwise I go crazy. So this actually has to go as well. And this also commented out here. So this is the other test condition. I have a miss true because I received 2 and it's okay. And then I have true 1, miss false. If I have a miss true, a miss false, apparently something goes wrong. This is also not really relevant. And this never even tried the hit command, apparently. So this is the description of something that went wrong. So post condition, the previous state was the last hit was 3. Misses was 2. Next was the last hit 1. Misses 2. This is wrong. Misses should be 3. Because if cache before was 1, 2, 3, and then cache after 1, 2, 3. How can this be a cache miss?
Should the last hits not be kind of a list with or the same as the capacity of the cache?
I'm only keeping track of the last element because that's a guarantee to be a cache hit. That's pretty much the only reason why I have last hit, is to ensure I can reproduce a cache hit. So I think it's
also used somewhere else secretly as kind of assumption whether it was a cache hit or a miss or something. Because when you only have one element, you can easily check if it's the same as the last hit, if it was a cache hit. Because I'm not sure where that logic went, where you determine whether it was a hit or a miss. But
yeah, so that's in the command. What I'm doing is this atom thingy thing. So I initialize an atom as false, and if this function is called, it should only be invoked when there was a cache miss. So I'm setting the cache miss to true only when you're executing this function, which should be only executing in case of a cache miss. But this, if I read this actually looks fine to me. This is not a cache miss, indeed. It's a cache miss false, and the cache before is the same as the cache after.
But then you should also reset it if it's a hit now.
I'm not putting this into any state, so I'm creating a new atom every time I run this command, and this is not put into the application state. I'm only updating last hit and the amount of misses. Let me just check. So if I have this, right? I have this thingy. I just want to check if maybe this logic is wrong, I'd say. So right? No, it's actually not like this. Next misses is not a thing. It's next misses and goes here. X misses, and then this previous last hit not equals. So what's K? I think it was actually 3. Previous last hit. Yeah, so this is probably wrong, this logic. So is it a miss? It's false. So then it should be actually this, right? What was it? Next misses. Next, oh. Misses. And then getting an X. It is true. So it feels to me it should actually be fine. I have actually.
Oh, no, you have a hit, but the hit is not the same as the previous last hit.
That should be in, so the next state is here, right? So I'm calculating the next last hit.
Or the last hit isn't properly maintained in the state or something. No. Yeah.
So previous, yeah, this is actually bizarre. So this is a cache miss false. So you're right. So if it's not a cache miss, why the last hit changes? Well, it's actually correct, right? Because now, yeah. So the problem is,
even if it misses, it should update the last hit.
Yeah. So this makes, this is yeah, similar to what you were mentioning before. This only works if the size of the cache is 1, as I was doing previously. If I increase the size of the cache, you might actually have a different next hit, and a different previous last hit, and who gives that? So if I only say this and remove the last hit checks, yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah. My bad. Oh. What? So, oh. The problem is that I still have the failing test here. It's actually weird. I never had that. So that works, but that's too fast. So now it seems like we fixed it. I really tests, because I do have a phantom tests that are still loaded in here, but I removed them. But so now it works actually. And if I were to, yeah, I can actually re-enable the logs on the commands. So that it shows it is actually doing stuff. So that was the bug. Thank you so much.
Nice.
Yay, it works. Clojure core cache also works. So now if and this is threshold 10, so I can do as many as I want now. It will still succeed. All right. So yeah, that's a useful library from my recent experience, and I intend to apply this once again to API testing. I'm in the middle of a very painful API rewrite. So in my company, we decided that we needed to have some sort of an ontology for our domain, so that we have it's a sort of our way of creating a domain-specific language to communicate between developers and non-developers. So we are defining every single noun we are redefining every single noun that we use, and we need to adapt all of our APIs to follow such an ontology. So we need to rewrite pretty much every API endpoint, every payload, every API client that we have.
But the general representation should be the same still, or?
Pretty much, yes. Well, that's to begin with. So we need to also change internal logic to some APIs, but we will start with defining the ontology, define the spec, update everything, check that everything works, and then move on with new features and new changes by keeping the ontology up to date. It's going to be interesting. And this is why I would like to leverage the same setup that I encountered in my last project, to use generative testing to make sure that whatever I do, I'm not breaking the system. And I'm pretty much, what I expect is that as soon as I'm done, I will have a better system than what I have today with regular integration tests, because the amount of details that you can test, especially with the sequence of commands, it's going to be much better than just plain code coverage as communicated by whatever tool with regular integration tests. That's what I expect. I'm going to let you know how my experience will go, but I'm now just busy writing the internal specs, so it will take a while. Yeah, that's it for this. Unless you want to play around with it a bit more, I'm kind of done. Good. And that's as much as I had in terms of a backup plan for an agendaless meetup. So, is there anything else you guys would like to talk about?
Nothing related to Clojure.
Boo!
At this point in time, no.
Yeah, anything about Rust then? Rust or Kafka, I assume?
Well, it was pretty because I need to explain it a bit. So I have this Rust library since I tried out Rust like 2 years ago already, I think. And then I found a missing part with trying to use the conflict schema registry. And that was just a bit of code, and then it was a nice idea to make it into a library. But now they changed the schema registry and made it a lot more complex. So then the client part also needs to become a lot more complex, and getting into it was a bit hard because I'm trying to, for some weeks, to get up with the Java version that has a lot more options. But it's really tedious stuff with Rust compared to Clojure. So you really kind of need to build your tests and your stuff. And then especially if you change the data model, then all your tests also need to change again. And it does say where it breaks, and it is easy to fix them, but it keeps tedious and a lot of work and stuff. And also, because it's a library, it's even more scary because I only can change the API one time, because at Rust they're pretty anal about semantic versioning. So even as if a library just changes the second number, but some other library that is using that library and it breaks, then they are just creating issue that should be a breaking change, and they should have changed the major number. So it's like that. I don't want to have that with my library, so I'm really putting a lot of thought in it, but how people would use my library, and then kind of improving the types and then rewriting the tests and then stuff like that. So and also the coverage, like if other people use that, and it was like also, I'm not sure where it's used because that's with open source, but it was downloaded like 1,000 times in the last 3 months. So there should be some people using it. So you really want to have everything tested properly. So you don't want anything breaking. So it's a nice challenge because it's like next week, Friday, will be a recording for the Kafka Submit, and that will be only at the end of August. So that's still far away. So, but yeah, that's it.
Okay. Good luck with that.
Yeah, Well, the major things are now working, and it's just a bit more refining on the API I did last evening, but I guess that's also kind of fine. So now it's merely just what I've done already for Avro, also doing for protobuf. So that's morely kind of copy pasting, checking out how the protobuf library works in Rust, and then just get the types matching and the test working, and then that should be fine.
Okay.
But it's definitely like much more work, and at some points much more annoying than if you would just write some Clojure application that you're just using and it's not a library.
Yeah. Well, one of the projects, I'm not doing much open source lately or ever, but one of the things that I'm maintaining these days is something that people are actually using. Like it's I don't know, is it a library? Not a library? I don't know. It's the Emacs measure mode for plenty-UML. Plenty-UML is a tool. It's a tool to write some text file with a representation of a diagram, and plenty-UML itself is a Java it's a Java program that takes those diagram descriptions and turn them into actual diagrams, SVG or ASCII art, whatever you want. And it's actually it's a very, especially now, very extensive product. You can define your own templates, your own skins, and there's tons of tooling around it. It started as a UML tool, but now it's a general diagramming tool. And I'm just maintaining the Emacs mode that allows you to type in your text, to do Control-C, Control-C, and then you have a magical pop-up showing you a picture. And without me knowing, it was incorporated in SpaceMax. Well, somebody created a layer for SpaceMax. So I actually have tens of thousands of downloads. And yeah, I'm kind of maintaining it, but my last commit is like, I don't know, 7 months ago, 9 months ago. And I have like 10 new issues that are queuing up. So I guess I'm a sloppy maintainer. So my point being, you can choose for yourself how to keep your things alive. I'd say it's best effort anyways.
Yeah, I'm also putting there's like this git tag, something with passively maintained, but people don't expect too much, and most of them are pretty kind, and I just say I can't look at it for the next few weeks, and then oh, it's fine.
Yeah, it was for me. It was I was trying to find my gateway drug to Emacs Lisp. I kind of know more of Emacs Lisp after doing that, but yeah, I didn't really find much time to keep the code base much alive. So yeah, I'd say that's a little bit of an off topic, but thanks for sharing. So I have 2 ideas for how to continue the evening, and I really don't like pushing ideas for the meetup too much. I'm too lazy to come up with new ideas, and I'm doing it already twice tonight, so that's way too much. Anyway, so it's now 1 hour plus into the meetup, so either we end it like now, or we do a time box exercise, time box session of something like a 4 Clojure exercises, because I heard that we have at least one person which is new to the language. So it can be a good, a good way of sharpening skills. What do you guys think?
For myself, I'm going to jump off. It's still business hours where I am, so yeah. I'm gonna get back to it. But thank you very much for organizing this meetup. Thanks for allowing me to attend. It was a pleasure to meet everybody, and I've been on the Clojure NL Slack channel, so I'll see you guys there and at the next meetup. So again, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for coming, and see you next time. Cheers.
Yeah. Doei.
I think that doing the exercise could be interesting, although, like, given that we've been already here for an hour and a half, perhaps we can just have some short talk. And I can also tell you a bit, like, now that you mentioned Rust, I can tell you a bit, like, the small project that I'm working on for learning Clojure. I'm following this, I don't know if you have heard, but there is this book called Crafting Interpreters. It's a book about how to write an interpreter for a language. And the book has two parts. Like, one is how to do a simple, like, tree-walking interpreter for a language that is very similar to JavaScript or to Lua, like a super simplified programming language. And the second part is, like, do it again, but this time using, like, a bytecode VM instead, which is a bit more performant. And the first part is done with, in the book, is done with Java, and the second part is done with C, which is a bit more appropriate for that. So I decided to work on this as a learning Clojure learning exercise, because before that I was just only doing, like, a small coding exercises and things like that, not an actual application. So I started coding this interpreter in Clojure. I also set this kind of like a learning goal of trying to make the interpreter fully functional. I didn't want to use any mutable structure like atoms or anything. And I ended up completely failing on that. Mostly because this language is imperative, and I was just actually, like, until a point I wrote the lexer, the parser, and I halfway through the interpreter, like, it was all completely functional. And then I arrived to a part where, like, classes and objects are defined and lexical closures, and then you have these weird conditions where suddenly you have this closure which can mutate anything where it was defined before, and then things start to get very tricky to implement in a purely functional way. You can just pass the state around and, like, try to implement some sort of, like, emulate some pointers or something like that. But in the end, you have to figure out how to garbage collect those things and things like that. It got really messy, so I ended up giving up and saying, like, hey, Clojure is very pragmatic, so let's just use an atom for this mutable things, and it worked like that. So that was my first part. And now for the second, I'm just starting also, like, I decided, okay, the second part is all about performance, and my Clojure implementation is already, like, not too fast, and it's understandable because I'm just passing, like, for every, like, operation that is interpreted, I basically pass the entire state around, which is like a persistent hash, and then that's changed, and it is a bit slow. So I said, okay, for this new part, I will just try to learn some Rust, because I actually read the book last year, the Rust book, but I never actually got any project to actually use it. For most projects, I think it's probably not the right fit. Like, I think it's a very interesting language, but I would use it for something that requires either performance or being very close to the metal.
Yeah, they removed, like, because they used to call it a system language, and they removed that now, but then it kind of still is. And especially if you compare some of the Rust libraries with the Java libraries, then there are functions missing, or there are just basic things that give errors and stuff like that. So yeah, for now, I totally agree.
So yeah, I think another thing is that Clojure kind of like ruins you for other languages, because it's like you start learning all this syntax and just starts getting more and more complicated, and more syntax and more things and more concepts, and suddenly I don't know, like it changes your perspective on things. Clojure syntax is so simple, and in general, like the model, like there's not a lot of things to learn in terms of like syntactic weird things. While Rust, yes, it's the book starts pretty nice, but then like at the second part until the end, it starts getting super weird. Like they have the type system gets super complicated, and they start having all sorts of workarounds and things. And yeah, it's nice because like it allows you to write very performant applications in a safe way, but also like if you can avoid it, you can go to simpler world and just have some functions that get data and return data, and that's it. I love that from the Clojure side of the world. Just keep it simple and
a lot of those additional annotations and stuff like that is just to keep the compiler happy, and
yeah, correct.
Adding any, or you don't feel like it's adding any value or something, but it's just to make sure that the compiler knows that something really is mutable or not, or
yeah, indeed. So yeah, that's my experience learning Clojure. I think that you mentioned, Carlo, you mentioned about the messy world of parentheses, but I think like for me, like that's not been really like a problem. Once you have this paredit extension, which I'm using, like it's just super nice. Actually, like nicer than regular like syntax. So I like it a lot. For me, like parts that have been a bit weird for Clojure, or well, not necessarily bad, but like it's been I'm very unused to this kind of style. Is this convention of just passing maps around, or just generic data structures, and not defining like a class or a struct or some like putting name of things. I still have to learn a bit about Clojure spec. I haven't used it. I just have read about it. It looks a bit like weird to me, so I have decided to set that aside, and I will learn it later. For now, I'm just learning how it is to code without it, but perhaps that can help maybe in the future.
Yeah, so I think spec can help out a lot, especially with the things you mentioned. Let me just try to share my screen again. So I up to like 5-6 months ago, I was mentioning to people thinking, should I learn spec or not? I was mentioning maybe it's a good idea to wait a bit because they are trying to come up with a spec version 2, but it's taking a bit. So I just say just go ahead and do that. Why not? So things, yeah. What allows you to do is like let me see, Clojure spec alpha. So you can define your. You say you have your maps with things like, let's say that you have a spec which is an age, which is a positive integer, and then you have name, which is and string complement Clojure string blank. So meaning it's both a string and something which is not a blank string, because string is true, and I think this is not a proper name. And then you can say, you can define your person as a map having, let's say, required set of keys, which is name, and then only an optional field of age, because we don't want to ask the age of everybody. And you can then explain data person of age 42. It tells you lots of stuff. It gives you a very detailed description of why a map only containing this data is not complying with the person specification. Pretty much it says yeah, let me just Clojure print of last value, a bit more readable. So at the root level, it says that it contains a username. this is a spec ways of saying you're missing a required key. So, and you can annotate. That's what I'm doing in my current project. I'm actually creating such specs for everything that flow through my system, from application to database interactions, as well as internal domain logic interaction, as well as API endpoint towards browser, JSON payloads. Everything is specced so that I can check whenever something goes wrong. I can, at least in my fiddling, in my REPL, try out things. One added value, well, this is actually not going to work, but Clojure, Clojure spec alpha sample of person, this is not going to work because your ID, you can even do then, right? Yes. Person, you can try to generate something with try to generate random values out of the spec. This is not really working because there are many default generators defined for many things. Let's say as def, well, we can do actually. So many functions, many predicates in Clojure have already predefined generators, and you can create your own custom generator. So what I'm also doing in my project already is for the small subset of data for which I created already the specs of, I already created a system that allows me to seed my database with initial data by generating random shit out of my specs, which is actually fairly convenient. And you can use it to generate input to your functions, input to your API endpoints. It is convenient not only to check, the fact that the data you're passing does not have a proper name attached to it, even though I found that using namespaced keywords kind of mitigates the problem, because it gives the namespace of a keyword gives you some context already in which you're trying to operate given the value that you're being given. But yeah, so it helps. It helps for taking the time to learn it. It's not a big framework, I'd say. Just the tooling around the ecosystem of tools around it, it's becoming fairly, well, no, not even that big, but it can be confusing because everybody comes with their own ideas, especially the guys from Metozin, the Finnish guys, they have some tools around the Clojure spec, which are somehow trying to go in a direction which the spec creators do not fully agree with. But I'm also using their tools anyways. So one interesting thing is, not you, but you.
Because something that I found before spec is this Clojure schema, which seemed a bit similar at some point. I think like what I look from a spec is that what I still have to adjust to is that sometimes when I read the specs, I find them a bit hard to read at the beginning. Like if I want to know, like, okay, what is the spec? I want to understand it. It takes a while to go and follow up all the references and
yeah.
And I like that the schema approach, where kind of like the schemas follow the structure of the data, so it was much easier to figure out what the schema was about. Like, because if it was a map where you would use a map, and it's a vector, you would use vector, and so on. That's the part that I want to adjust. Well, I still like can understand well from spec.
Yeah, one thing that there are some tools that work with spec. For instance, in Cider, you do have a spec browser already
nice.
Embedded. So this is actually kind of making life slightly easier. So you do like Cider, spec, browse spec, and then you can browse your own spec. Right? But the only thing I did was user, because that's the only thing. But you see, yeah, person, name, age already here. You can say year, and so it helps in a way, right?
Yeah.
even though I do agree that a few things of spec make it a bit harder to use. Navigability is limited because they have specs are not just data. There is this hidden spec registry that you cannot directly inspect, and not a few things I do not really like out of it. But in general, I think it is a useful tool, and I'm actually using. I've been abusing it even a lot. There's this. Yeah, of course, conform. You can conform a person. I think it's actually age. This is probably wrong. Name foo. So you can have a conforming function. So conforming is the process of taking a value and making sure that it matches a spec. And you can write your own custom conforming functions. And I abused the spec in the sense that I used conforming functions to go from a plain hidden representation of a JSON down to namespaced maps for everything. So I was doing like parsing and namespacing and shit, which is doable. I would not recommend that, though. It's not what it is meant for. And you have things like you can have many things as or foo and var. So you can say now conform many things foo. So there are a few things of the conforming step. So this is the conformed value. This means that the value of this string foo conforms to the spec of many things following the branch tagged with foo, and the value is this. Because in an S or spec, you can have multiple branches. You need to tag each and every one of them. So this actually reads better probably. So that in what I was doing to try to go from hidden to namespaced maps, this was breaking everywhere because the conformed value is not really what you think it is. It's a more descriptive thingy that takes into account these nuances of spec itself. But yeah.
Cool.
All right, guys, I will be totally honest with you. I'm hearing that my daughter is screaming like my wife is trying to kill her. So I think my help is needed elsewhere. So I think I'm just gonna thank you guys so much for spending your time with us tonight, and enjoy your evening, I'd say, and see you next time. Hopefully I will remember what the number of meetup it will be.
Thank you very much for organizing it.
My pleasure.
And good luck for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.